Hello, and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that challenges readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. As ever, I'm joined by a book-loving guest, and this episode, I'm joined by author Deborah Tomkins. Deborah, so nice to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure's all mine. I'm so excited to get into the list of books that you want to be cast away to. But for the benefit of any listeners who might not be familiar with you and what you do, could you just introduce yourself and talk about you and reading?
Okay, reading. Well, I have hundreds and hundreds of books. My husband challenges me to sum up every week. But then I smuggle a few more in. Yeah, I just read and read. My parents were great readers and they encouraged all of us. So from the time I really could read, which was probably about 5, I was just reading, and we all were. We always had piles of books around the house, and it's never left me. It's something I have a book on the go. If I'm eating alone, if everybody's out and I've got a meal table by myself, I will be reading. I'm watching television. I read in bed, read whenever I can. Trains, all that kind of thing.
Definitely trains are a great place to read. I used to have a daily commute on a train, and it was the best sort of 2 hours of my day, the hour there and the hour back.
Fantastic, yeah. Yeah.
And I mentioned at the top that you're an author. Is your love of reading the reason you got into that career, or did you fall into it by it?
Oh, potentially, yes. I'm not really quite sure about that. I know when I was a really little girl at primary school, I always thought I'd like to write the books, the kinds of stories I was reading, because I loved them so much. And we had this wonderful thing in a particular class for 2 years, because it was a very small primary school when we were 85 pupils. And on a Friday afternoon, the teacher, I think all the teachers there were only 3 classes. The age range was quite large. And I think by the end of the week, the teachers were quite exhausted. And in circles around our teachers and listen to a story for about an hour. And these would be long books. They'd be adventure stories. They wouldn't just be short books. And I loved that. We all did. You could have heard a pin drop. 30 children sitting there just listening. I'd always thought I would do that, but I was only little. And it never really left me, actually. I think the idea of creating that magical world for other people was always there in the back of my mind. But I didn't do anything about it until about 18 years ago. And then I thought, I've really got to give this a go. More about that in a bit, if you like.
Yeah. Well, tell me now. I'm intrigued now. You're born storyteller, clearly.
Yeah, I've been very involved in climate campaigning for 35 years probably. And I've been very concerned about it, climate and environment, because I would be reading stuff, research that was very difficult to get hold of, but I subscribed to various publications and that would tell people who are interested what's going on. It wasn't really in the mainstream media, and it certainly wasn't on the bookshelves in fiction. And I started thinking, well, there's a gap here. There should be literature in this environment, so what's going on? There is now, but in 2007 I started to write my first novel. I had not even written any short stories since I'd left school. So it was a bit of a leap, but I learned a lot about writing doing that. I didn't even know any other writers at that point. We moved house 3 years later, and I moved to Bristol, which is chock full of creative people and lots of writers. And this is when I started building my networks. But that first novel I might dig out sometime, because there were some really good ideas in it, and I didn't really send it out anywhere. I knew it wasn't good enough to be published. I might look at it again. That does sometimes happen.
It's always funny rereading things that you wrote a long time ago, or even actually not as long ago as you might think, because it feels like you're communicating with a different person because you're so different from the person who wrote it.
I don't feel I really was very different from where I am now, because I was quite established in my adult life. And when I started writing, I had a couple of teenage children and a younger child, and they've all grown up now. And I had been involved in that kind of environmental world for quite a long time. So I feel that all the themes I was writing about then are still the themes I'm writing about now. And I suppose I am a bit different. I mean, you do change a little bit over life, but the essence of a person is always there, the essence. So I'm still I'm still the same 5-year-old, in a sense.
I have done some very brief, I suppose, research into sustainability in connection to my normal day-to-day job. And yeah, there themes regarding sustainability, they do seem broadly the same over time. And I don't know if that's a reflection on not much progress or the fact that it was always going to be the same. But I find it interesting that you say that a lot of the themes then are very similar to what you write about now.
It's not that I think there's been lots of progress, loads and loads of progress from what I see and hear. It's simply that the issues are the same and a lot of the solutions are going to always be the same. Grow food locally rather than transporting it halfway across the world. That's been said for 40 years now. And is it happening? Not much. Is that kind of thing. We do need to do that. We need to be more food self-sufficient. Each country does. And we also need to use less fuel because of the climate. For example, in the UK, we import nearly 50% of our food. But we could easily reduce that by growing food locally. And it's just one of these sensible things that people don't really think about.
Yeah, it's one of those common sense.
Yeah. It's absolutely common sense. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Getting back to books.
Yeah.
Do you find that you read a lot in terms of sustainability, or do you branch across a lot of different genres?
Lots of different genres. There was a period of time when I was reading almost entirely non-fiction, probably 20 odd years ago, and I was just trying to get to grips with the issues. And I feel I have got to grips with the issues, and now I know what's going on. I keep an eye on it, but I'm not reading in depth as I was then. So probably for about 5 years, I was reading really in-depth non-fiction stuff in terms of sustainability and environment and climate. These days, I read really widely. I read history. I've got a biography on the history, biography of Shakespeare, new one. Well, new to me. I read poetry. I read general fiction and as well as science fiction. Although I'm not very well read recent science fiction, it has to be said. I was very well read science fiction wise as a teenager. I read loads.
Probably my preferred. I like older science fiction. A lot of the newer science fiction strays into very high-techy themes, if that makes sense, because science fiction is supposed to be future-facing.
Yeah, yes, it does. And not everybody's interested in the high-tech. I'm interested in story. I'm interested in Jules and their journey, their internal journey. I suppose that's why I'm a literary writer. And you can do that in science fiction. And a lot of the older science fiction writers did do that. Back in the 50s and 60s, they were doing a lot of that. So that's really interesting to explore those. However, I moved away from science fiction in my 20s simply because I was exploring other types of writing. And so I read a lot of other things.
I'm curious as to which Shakespeare biography you are reading, because I've seen some new ones come out recently.
To go and get it. I think it's called The Lodger, and it may have been published a few years ago. I haven't looked to see, but I picked it up the other day and I thought it looks really great.
It's amazing how people keep finding new lenses to look at Shakespeare through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, you are going to pick 5 books that you can take with you when cast away.
Yeah.
As ever, our guest gets to pick their isolated mystery remote location. Where would you like to be cast away?
I had no idea you were going to ask me this. This is all it's very interesting. I think I'm going to go to Narnia.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I'd love to meet talking animals. I think that'd be great. Fauns, satyrs, all those people. I think it'd be amazing to meet these people.
Are we talking snowy cabin in Narnia?
I don't know. I think I'm not that wild about the snow. I'd like a more temperate climate. It gets a bit more temperate later on. They've still got all their adventures. I think I'd just be observing the adventures. I'd just be observing.
To have a nice tower to watch.
So I could see them sailing across the sea and all that. Yeah, I think I'd quite like that. It'd be fun.
Excellent. Well, we're off to Narnia. what is the first book you'll be taking with you?
Okay, the first book was published in 2007, and I came across it not long after it was published. And it's an anthology called Earth, Shattering, Ecopoems from the poetry publisher BloodX, edited by Neil Astley. And I absolutely love it. I have used it and used it and used it just for my own benefit and in workshops and places like that. And it's interesting because it goes from very early poetry, very early Chinese poetry, and Greek and so on, right up to 2007 or 2006, whenever. But it's divided into sections, different sections on, I need to find them now, of nature, or natural disasters, or the Great War, actually, exploitation. And there's some fantastic poets, absolutely beautiful poems, and ones that really stand the test of time. Scattered around are lots of tiny essays. They're either short biographies of the poet, I'm looking at Wendell Berry here, or Thomas Tranströmer, who's a Swedish poet. So there's poetry in translation as well, Denise Levertov, all sorts of people, and also some smallish essays about some of the topics and some of the history. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's a fantastic book, and I would really not want to be parted with this ever.
It looks like a well-thumbed copy that you're holding.
Yes, you've got little post-it notes in it, and that's from the last time I used it was a couple of years ago when I did something with some people, and there's loads of post-it notes just stuck inside. Yes, I love it.
And I take it from the title that it's of a environmental slant in terms of...
Absolutely, that's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
It's an anthology, obviously, so it starts with rooted in nature. So it starts with people's love of nature. And we've got some very old poets. There's a whole load of Chinese poets. And then you've got Henry Thoreau, you've got William Wordsworth, Rainer Maria Rilke. And then it goes into changing the landscape. And again, there's some very old poets, Oliver Goldsmith, William Cooper, John Clare. And then it goes into other things, killing the wildlife. And poetry is extraordinary because it's talking about universal truths in a very narrow lens, quite often, that it can bring in the big picture. I think I'm not a poet, but I do think this is, I really admire some poets. I know some modern poets, Neil Astley himself, Ted Hughes, who's I think of as modern, W.S. Merwin, all sorts of people. John Burnside, who only died last year, who's a wonderful poet.
Yeah, I think what you say about it spanning quite a long period in history, there is a incorrect notion that sustainability and environmentalism is a modern concept that sort of was invented by us in our 20th century. And it all started with the Brundtland Report. But you don't need to tell you. It's fascinating if you know what to look for, because it's sustainability or environmental, but by another name. It's something that, as a species, we've kind of been aware of, if not tacitly, for a really long time. And it makes sense that it would be appearing in artistic endeavours like poetry and things like that.
Absolutely. I think it's more than that, though. I think it's got a sharp edge now, sustainability, because we are in a crisis, and we're in several crises. But I think there's deep somehow within us all, because we are animals actually at heart, aren't we? There is a love of nature. And if you give a child the chance, a bit of forest school or just going for a nature walk, I did a lot of that with my children. Yeah. One of my sons is now a regenerative farmer because he understands the value of nature. And a lot of the early poets, the Chinese poets and the 16th or 15th century poets, really understood how beautiful and unique and wonderful nature was, even though they didn't know about the fact that we seem to be the only planet in the universe that supports life. And it's not just me saying that, Professor Brian Cox.
The unrivaled
Professor Brian Cox. Even though they didn't know that, because we didn't have the knowledge, they knew that there was something very special going on. And there's a deep love. I think given half a chance, and if you can get children young enough, everybody will be interested in nature and in the environment and how it works.
My son one of the first things he asked me in terms of putting a request and going is he wanted to go somewhere in his rain suit because that means there's going to be mud.
Yes. And he can splash in puddles and all that. I remember actually going on walks with some of my children, and he'd lift up a stone and there'd be woodlice, and they'd be absolutely fascinated by the little creatures scurrying around with their little tiny legs. And we're always very careful to say, you've got to be really gentle.
Yeah.
They're doing their work, they're doing their jobs. You've got to be really careful and gentle with them. Yeah, I think it's innate, and it's a love of nature. And actually, it doesn't take much to people. You take them out to a beautiful place where they can see a sunset and they all go, oh, wow, isn't this amazing? Modern life is so fast and furious, and we don't have the chance that people in the past did.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to use it as an excuse to be a slightly lax gardener. Our old neighbours used to, and dislike is probably too strong a word, but they'd get frustrated with me because I didn't want to cut back all of the grass and wildflowers because I thought it looked nice. They disagreed. And yeah, slightly different taste.
Yeah, but it's really important to wildlife too. If you don't cut till, say, June, you don't cut your grass till June, these insects, which are absolutely important for everything, including our food supplies, they get a chance to breed.
So an important message for everyone listening.
Message, yeah.
Okay, so we've had a poetry anthology as a really well-thumbed but loved start.
Very deeply loved, yes.
What is the second book you'd like to take with you?
I read a lot of science fiction as a teenager. I'm going to bring... this was really difficult to choose because John Wyndham is a classic writer. Here we go. The Chrysalids, an amazing book. Well, everything he wrote was amazing. But he was a great stylist. He wrote quite short books with a real punch. Not long-winded, not lots of long convoluted words or sentences, but really well written. And one of the things I appreciate about him, I think The Chrysalids was written in, let me just quickly look and see. It was written in 1955. So it's a long time ago, 70 years ago. But one of the things I appreciated about him and always have done, and I've read his books several times over the years, and it was really difficult to choose, but I've chosen this one, is because he treats women seriously.
A rare thing, yes.
Very rare, and it's not just a man's world. And I've read plenty of books from that time where women are just at home cooking the roast or whatever and not really taken seriously. He takes women seriously in his books. And girls. I loved that as a girl. I grew up in a family of girls. And my mother was very keen that we should all get tertiary education because she had never had the chance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a tremendous book. I think all his writing is tremendous. So this was really difficult.
I can imagine. I think it is such a powerful thing because especially in science fiction and fantasy, a lot of authors do sometimes fall back on making women or girls lesser or secondary characters and using the excuse that it's, I don't know, historically expired or they're falling back on traditional values or whichever the reason is. And it's so pervasive that until you read something where it's not been included, you're looking for what's missing and you realise it's that.
Yeah, absolutely. He was also writing this is a really interesting book, talking about genetic mutation and what happens. And people who have the mutations, you've probably not read this book. It was well known at the time, but
I feel like I've heard of it, but no, I've not read it.
John Wyndham takes the reader into the anguished heart of a community where the chances of breeding true are less than 50% and where deviations are rooted out and destroyed as offences and abominations. And so there are outcasts in this book, and it's a young person who's the protagonist, and he discovers that his uncle is an outcast and is a deviant, basically. They don't use that word, but is an abomination, has not bred true as a human being. And also his little sister has 6 toes instead of 5. And the family are desperate to keep that secret. So there's a whole load of really interesting themes in here from 1955, which is still fresh today.
They're still being used by authors today for their dystopian worlds.
I like to think he is one of the first.
I love tracing the roots of a lot of the ideas that are considered sort of trendy and new now, and you can trace them quite far back usually. We've got sci-fi, poetry. What is the third book you'll be taking with you?
I'll be taking... Now, I'm really sad that I can't have a trilogy, but I've got... There's Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. So you know this one?
I've heard of it. I've wanted to read it for so long, but I find it really hard to get editions near me because I like to get them either independently or secondhand.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you may be lucky. Well, anyway, I read this again first as a young person, I guess about 17 or 18. It was the voice that captivated me. It was like some kind of magical incantation. And I'd go to sleep and I'd be dreaming that this voice was in my head, even in my sleep. It was extraordinary. So the trilogy, I will mention the whole trilogy because it's about Merlin. Basically, it's from the point of view of Merlin, who is not particularly magical, although there is some kind of strange magic in it all. What's also captivating about this book is the sheer amount of accurate historical research about Romano-British culture. So this is set in about the 4th century AD when the Romans are withdrawing from England, from Britain. It wasn't England in those days because the Saxons hadn't arrived, from Britain. And the Romano-British leaders, there's a whole load of political stuff going on. It's really fascinating. I absolutely love it. So I read it again about 3 years ago, the whole trilogy, and found again that it just really got into my head. There is a 4th volume, which is, in my view, not so good, although somebody I spoke to about it a couple of years ago said that she thought it was equally good. But it's not written from the point of... It's not written in the first person. It's not written from Merlin's point of view. It's written from a different... It's in the third person, and it doesn't quite pack the punch. But I just love these books. So that's coming with me, definitely.
It is always difficult when a beloved series gets a new install.
Yes, well, these were written a long time ago. I'm going back a long way. These are written... This was 1970, this one.
I'm a big fan of anything Arthurian. I was a big fan of the BBC show Merlin when I was young.
Yes, it was great. I was actually once out with my son and one of my sons and one of his friends over in the Forest of Dean, and that's where they filmed it. Yeah. And we just arrived. We were sitting in the car, just about to get out, and saw these people in armour and so on walking across the car park off to the catering van. And then they disappeared off to their little caravans. And then we went down into the caves where it was filmed and found these massive polystyrene rocks that the boys could just hold up. They're absolutely huge, about the size of a bed. And they could hold them up above their head. It's absolutely great. But we didn't get to talk to any of the actors. One of the boys was keen and the other one was very shy, so we didn't do that.
That's fair. I'm really loving the rain in terms of the different themes and genres. I'm excited to see how we round off the list. What is the penultimate?
I'm going to pick, again, it would be anything by Niall Williams, who's an Irish writer. He's most fantastic writer, but I'll pick his first book. This was the first one I came across, which is called 4 Letters of Love. And I only read that about 7 or 8 years ago. And then since then, I've devoured a lot of his work. 4 Letters of Love it's about love. It was his first novel as an independent author, not independently published. I mean, as he'd written several books as a co-author with his wife, but this is the first book he wrote as a sole author. They're all set in Ireland, his books, apart from one, actually. And they are so full of... It's a kind of magic, but not the kind of Mary Stewart Arthurian magic. This is the kind of magic that comes when you really delve into love. What it actually means. It means compassion and kindness and generosity and all these mercy, all these wonderful things, these qualities that we all admire. And there's always redemption at the end in a situation that looks hopeless. And in this book, 4 Letters of Love, there is actually tragedy. There's quite a bit of real sadness and real difficulty. And ordinary people are just muddling through, trying to make the best of things. And things come better. And it's not, you can't undo the tragedy, but people can come through. And there's this redemption. And I love his work. There's a lot of deep hope in it. They're not full of trite, easy answers at all, but I really love it. The other thing about his writing is it is exceptionally beautiful. And there was a review once, I don't know which book it was about, but it was Niall Williams writes like an angel. And he really does. It is exceptionally beautiful, poetic language, but very easy to understand as well. It's, again, not difficult to understand. I have a thing about this. Writing should be accessible to people.
Yes, it can be beautiful and accessible. They aren't mutually exclusive things.
No, and he's an extraordinary writer.
Just broadly, what's Four Letters of Love about?
Oh,
I understand that's really difficult when it's a book that you love.
It is. It's really difficult. The beginning is the very first paragraph. This boy who's about 12, and he grows up in the book as well. He grows up through the years, which I also appreciate because I tend to write over a long time span. He says God just spoke to his father, and his father had to become a painter when he's a civil servant. And this causes difficulty, actually, real difficulty, because where does the money come from? And his mother, shall I give a spoiler, maybe? I'll avoid spoiler, but it's very difficult. And then eventually all the painters have gone and he's trying to track down one. And he finds it in an entirely different part of the country and meets this woman who's also had a really difficult life. And it's an amazing journey he goes on. Emotional journey, a kind of psychological and emotional journey.
Wonderful. I mean, we're just cross all that encompass the human experience.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is also there's a lot about faith in Niall Williams' books. What does faith mean? And where is God in everything?
Yeah.
And if God is a God of love, how does that work? There's all that kind of thing going on as well. I really appreciate his work.
We have reached the final book in your list. What is the last one you'll be taking with you?
Okay, another one that's really very old called Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And it's the only book he published in his lifetime. Ralph Ellison, possibly a writer you've not ever heard of, Black American author, the only novel published in his lifetime. And I read it as a student. I've got my name in it from, I don't know, a very long time ago. I'm not going to say how long ago it was. I did French linguistics at university, and I used to haunt in the university bookshop the English literature shelves. So I was occasionally buying books that probably somebody was desperate to get hold of. So anyway, and I remember reading this and just being bowled over because he wrote it. It was published in 1953, I think. It was about the Black American experience, and it's why it's called Invisible Man. Because, and it goes right the way through the civil rights. Well, it can't do because obviously Martin Luther King hadn't done his stuff then, but there are riots there. There's all kinds of ways that Black people are dismissed and patronised and so on. But this man is living underground with stolen electricity from New York's city electricity supplies. And he starts telling his story. And I absolutely love it. It starts with, I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fibre and liquids. And I might even be said to possess a mind. So it's a real person. But of course, in those days, prejudice was so deep and strong that Black people often were believed to be very intelligent. He is an extraordinary writer.
It's a really strong opening.
Very strong opening and very powerful book. And it really opened my eyes to the Black experience.
Wow, a very significant book to end.
It is. I haven't read it for years, so I want to take it with me.
Wonderful. For the benefit of listeners who might want to jot them down and run off to the bookshop and maybe have more luck than me in sourcing stuff, would you just recap all 5 of your picks?
Certainly. So it's Earth, Shattering, Ecopoems, edited by Neil Astley, and that's from Blood Axe Books. Then John Wyndham, The Chrysalids, and I'm sure it's been reprinted in the last few years. I have a Penguin edition here. Mary Stewart, The Crystal Cave, 4 Letters of Love by Niall Williamson. And finally, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison.
Wonderful. You said it was very difficult to create.
Really difficult, really, really hard. Yeah.
Were there any books that you really wanted to include but couldn't quite?
Yeah, definitely. More John Wyndham. Definitely. More Niall Williams. Definitely. I would quite like to take with me We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. I loved that book. And again, it's full of ethics, but beautifully written and just eye-opening. It's about a girl and her sister who are brought up together. And have you come across it?
No, it rings a very faint bell, but I'm not sure.
It's based on a very famous experiment several decades ago. The sister is actually a chimpanzee. So you can imagine it gets very difficult. It's an absolutely brilliant book. I loved it.
And also dangerous. Chimpanzees are
The problem. So the sister gets sent away, and the little girl can't understand why her sister has been sent away because she's become too strong, too big, too dangerous, too aggressive. And yeah, there's a whole load of things going on in that book. It's really, really great. Yeah, I'd love to take that with me. I'd sneak it in.
I love that you're a backlist reader. You'll find an author you like. You clearly just mine all of the books you learn.
I try to, but then I get distracted by lots of other books. So, it doesn't always happen.
Wonderful. Deborah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. You have got a book out. What can you tell us about that?
Well, before I tell you about it, I actually have 2 books out this year. So I've got Aerth, which is spelled Aerth, from Weatherglass Books. And it was the joint winner of the Weatherglass Novella Prize last year, which was judged by Ali Smith. And just thrilled to bits about that. So I've got it there.
Oh, that's gorgeous. For listeners who can't see this, it's a gorgeous cover.
It is a really great cover. It also has flaps, which I love. Look at this flap.
Premium paperback.
Amazing.
I'm very happy.
I love it. And so this book, it was actually published 10 days ago, or roughly 10 days ago, 25th of January. And it's already gone to reprint. So I'm really thrilled and excited about that.
Can imagine that. I'm happy for you. And I only just found out.
It's had some really lovely reviews in the press. Reviews are coming in from influencers now as well, which is great. And this is a story, I really find it hard to explain my own word. It's a sort of science fiction framing, but it's not really science fiction. I mess around with physics at one point, which is really fun. It's a bit like magic, a bit like Narnia. I can make anything happen if I want to. But it's about how we choose to live, really, what our choices are, what we feel is important in life. And it's about a young man called Magnus who grows up on Aerth, Earth, and he travels to another planet, which is very similar but different, also called Earth, but spelled Urth, which is the other side of the sun. Yeah, there's a lot going on in that.
Colour me intrigued.
Yeah, there you go. And it can be obtained from Weatherglass Books. And if you buy it from them rather than somewhere else, you get a nifty bookmark, which actually advertises both books. So the second book is called The Wilder Path, and that's coming out with Aurora Metro. And that also was a prize winner last year, the winner of the Virginia Prize of Fiction. And that's coming out in May. And that's not got any science fiction in it at all. It has there's a slightly spooky element and there's a slightly fantastical element, but in a dream sequence, really. But it's about climate and grief, and about personal grief as well, and about finding a way through.
I feel that I'm going to have to not only buy myself a copy, but I've got several people that I immediately think need to read these books.
That would be great. Thank you very much. So that will be out in May. Yeah.
And for listeners who are big fans of a environmentally inspired front cover, both very gorgeous. Not that we judge books by their covers, but...
So The Wilder Path it's a lino cut. A lino cut design from a really lovely artist.
Wonderful. Deborah, thank you so much for giving me your time.
That's all right, with pleasure.
And bearing with the technical difficulties that listeners, I hope, will not be able to detect.
No, no problem. No problem at all. I know what it's like.
If listeners wanted to follow your work anywhere, do you have social media?
Minimally. I am now... I'm on BlueSky as... Oh, gosh, I think it's what my handle is.
I can include it in the podcast description.
At tomkinsdeb.bluesky.social. Basically, yeah, I'll send that to you. And then I also have a website, deborahtomkinswriter.com.
All will be included in the podcast description. I also do minimal social media, but if listeners would like to listen, they can listen on any podcast provider. And if they want to follow the podcast, they can follow us on just Instagram at BooksLastPod. And I sometimes post on that. But yes, Deborah, thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye for now.
Bye. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.